In the ever-shifting landscape of international trade, the imposition of steep tariffs has historically been one of the most powerful weapons in the arsenal of economic diplomacy. In recent weeks, a dramatic example has unfolded in the relationship between Washington and New Delhi. United States President Donald Trump has enforced a sweeping 50% tariff on Indian goods, only weeks after already imposing an additional 25% penalty over India's continued purchases of Russian oil and defense equipment. This new tariff places India among the most heavily taxed countries exporting to the United States, despite being one of Washington's key allies in the Indo-Pacific. For India, the world's fifth largest economy, this development strikes at a delicate time when growth has slowed, unemployment is rising, and global demand is already under strain. The move is not merely an economic measure, but also a geopolitical message. The Trump administration has long criticized India for maintaining strategic ties with Moscow, especially in the realm of energy and defense. The tariffs are meant to signal Washington's discontent, while also placing direct pressure on New Delhi to align more closely with American positions. Yet India's response has not been one of retreat, but of resilience. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, speaking at the nation's Independence Day celebrations while wearing his characteristic saffron turban, urged citizens to embrace the philosophy of self-reliance. His appeal to small businesses, urging them to showcase Swadeshi, or Made in India, goods, struck both a nationalistic and pragmatic chord. He made it clear that while the world may be turning increasingly protectionist, India's path forward must be one of pride and domestic strength, not dependence. To mitigate the blow, Modi has unveiled a series of measures designed to stimulate demand and soften the impact of lost trade opportunities. Central to this plan are tax reforms. Earlier in the year, his government had announced a $12 billion income tax cut, and now he promises a massive restructuring of India's indirect tax system. The Goods and Services Tax (GST), introduced nearly a decade ago to unify a fragmented system of levies, has been criticized for its complexity. By simplifying it into a two-tier framework and lowering overall rates, the government hopes to immediately boost consumption. Analysts from financial firms such as Morgan Stanley and UBS suggest that such reforms could help sustain growth by putting more money in the hands of consumers. The stakes could not be higher. Private consumption accounts for nearly 60% of India's GDP, and demand has been slowing, especially in urban centers. Rising unemployment in sectors such as information technology, coupled with post-pandemic wage stagnation, has left many households cautious. A fiscal stimulus at this juncture, therefore, could revive consumer confidence and encourage spending. Additionally, the Reserve Bank of India has already reduced interest rates by 1% in recent months, signaling scope for further monetary support if fiscal reforms take effect. Beyond domestic policy, the global reaction has been mixed. While stock markets in India responded positively to Modi's tax announcements, trade talks between the U.S. and India have stalled, further highlighting the fragility of ties. The sovereign rating upgrade India recently received from S&P Global after nearly 2 decades may boost investor sentiment, but it does not erase the fact that a 50% tariff from the U.S., its once largest trading partner, is a severe blow. In effect, India now finds itself at a crossroads. It must balance its strategic autonomy, particularly in maintaining energy security through Russian imports, with the reality that its exports to the U.S. are being strangled. This is not merely a story of numbers, tariffs, and tax reforms. It is a defining moment in the trajectory of India's global role. Whether Modi's call for self-reliance can transform a challenge into an opportunity will determine how Asia's third largest economy positions itself in a world tilting toward economic nationalism and geopolitical rivalries. The imposition of a 50% tariff on Indian exports is not just an economic dispute, it is rooted deeply in geopolitics. Washington's concern over New Delhi's energy and defense ties with Moscow has been long-standing. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States and its allies have sought to isolate Moscow financially and diplomatically. Yet India, heavily dependent on imported oil and advanced defense equipment, has not cut ties. Instead, it has ramped up purchases of discounted Russian crude, saving billions of dollars annually. While this ensures India's energy security, it also places it directly at odds with American foreign policy objectives. Donald Trump's tariffs, therefore, can be seen as an extension of his transactional approach to international relations. His presidency has often been characterized by the belief that economic leverage can force countries into alignment. By raising costs on Indian exports, he signals that there is a price for non-cooperation. Yet the strategy risks alienating a partner that Washington itself has deemed critical to counterbalancing China in the Indo-Pacific. For India, this episode highlights the difficulties of walking a tightrope. It wants to preserve strategic autonomy, ensuring that no single power dictates its foreign policy. At the same time, it cannot afford a breakdown in trade with the United States, which had until recently been its largest export market. Experts argue that the U.S. move is unprecedented, almost akin to a sanction, given the scale of the tariff. This suggests that global geopolitics is increasingly blurring the lines between economics and security, with trade tools being used as instruments of diplomatic coercion. The fallout could extend beyond India. Other countries maintaining ties with Russia will watch carefully. If Washington successfully pressures New Delhi through tariffs, it may embolden similar measures elsewhere. Conversely, if India weathers the storm and sustains its ties with Moscow while maintaining economic growth, it could inspire others to resist American pressure. Thus, the tariff war is not just bilateral, it is symbolic of a larger contest between national interest, alliance politics, and the reshaping of global order. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's rallying cry for self-reliance in the face of Donald Trump's punitive tariffs is both a political statement and an economic necessity. The symbolism of his message is powerful. Speaking from the historic Red Fort on Independence Day, he urged citizens to embrace a Swadeshi and to proudly display Made in India signs outside their shops. This appeal connects with India's long tradition of economic nationalism, reaching back to the Swadeshi movement during the freedom struggle, when Indian leaders encouraged boycotts of foreign goods to build indigenous industry. By drawing from that history, Modi seeks to frame the current crisis not merely as a response to external pressure, but as part of a broader national mission of pride and resilience. His words are designed to assure Indians that the path of self-reliance is not about retreat, but about strength and dignity in a changing world. However, translating symbolism into reality is far more complex. India has long aspired to build a robust manufacturing base, yet despite years of reforms, subsidies, and incentives, manufacturing continues to stagnate at around 15% of gross domestic product. The Make in India campaign, launched in 2014, was meant to attract investment, generate jobs, and reduce dependence on imports. While some progress has been made in sectors like electronics and mobile phone assembly, large-scale industrialization remains elusive. Structural bottlenecks, such as inadequate infrastructure, high logistics costs, and regulatory complexity, continue to undermine competitiveness. In such an environment, a sudden push for self-reliance risks becoming more rhetorical than practical. That said, Modi's strategy does not rely on manufacturing alone. By promising sweeping tax reforms, he is attempting to shift the balance towards stimulating domestic consumption. Simplifying the goods and services tax and reducing rates could make goods cheaper, encourage spending, and energize small businesses. Since private consumption accounts for nearly 60% of India's economy, this could be a powerful tool in offsetting the pain caused by lost export revenues. In addition, incentives for local production may eventually strengthen domestic supply chains, especially in consumer goods, textiles, and food processing industries that have the potential to absorb millions of workers. Critics warn, however, that self-reliance should not slide into protectionism. Cutting off global integration could isolate India at a time when global supply chains are being reconfigured. Instead, analysts suggest that India must use this moment to improve competitiveness, investing in infrastructure, digital technology, and skills, so that local production meets international standards. In other words, self-reliance must be about capability, not isolation. Modi's message resonates emotionally with the public, but the challenge lies in ensuring that policies and reforms align with the vision. If India succeeds, the current crisis may turn into a turning point, laying the foundation for a more resilient and independent economy. The economic consequences of the United States imposing a 50% tariff on Indian exports are already reverberating across multiple sectors of the country's economy. At the heart of the matter lies India's export-driven industries ranging from textiles, jewelry, and seafood to pharmaceuticals that have historically relied on the American market as a major destination. For decades, the United States has been either India's first or second largest trading partner, and the sudden imposition of such high tariffs is comparable to a near-shut door on a vital channel of foreign earnings. This could translate into billions of dollars in lost revenues, reduced orders for small and medium exporters, and significant pressure on the livelihoods of millions of workers employed in these industries. For example, India's diamond and jewelry sector alone sustains over 5 million jobs and exports a large share of its output to American buyers. A tariff of this magnitude threatens not only profits, but also employment stability in already fragile labor markets. The slowdown in exports also has wider consequences for the economy. India's gross domestic product, which was growing at over 8% just a few years ago, has already slipped to lower levels in the wake of the pandemic and global uncertainty. With external demand suppressed by the tariff shock, the pressure on domestic consumption becomes even greater. Yet urban consumption has been weak, with households holding back on discretionary spending due to job losses and wage stagnation in key sectors such as information technology and manufacturing. By contrast, rural demand has held up somewhat better, helped by a strong agricultural harvest. Still, without strong urban consumption, the overall economic engine risks stalling. This is precisely why Modi's government has moved aggressively with tax cuts and promises of a simplified goods and services tax structure. By putting more disposable income in the hands of consumers, the government hopes to revive demand that can cushion the blow of declining exports. Another key economic consequence is the strain on fiscal management. Reductions in taxes inevitably mean reduced government revenues, while at the same time, greater public spending is required to support growth and employment. Although India has enjoyed stronger than expected collections from certain taxes and dividends from its central bank, analysts caution that a prolonged export slowdown could create fiscal gaps. Furthermore, the tariff escalation raises questions about foreign direct investment. While India recently secured a rare sovereign rating upgrade from S&P Global, sustained trade tensions could dampen investor enthusiasm, especially if businesses perceive instability in India's global trade relations. Despite these risks, some analysts see a silver lining. If tax reforms succeed in driving consumption, and if monetary easing by the Reserve Bank continues, India could use domestic demand as a buffer to maintain momentum. Moreover, industries serving India's own growing middle class, such as automobiles, consumer electronics, and housing materials, may find fresh opportunities. Yet this is a fragile balancing act. Without decisive reforms and consistent policy execution, the economic consequences of Trump's tariff could deepen structural weaknesses, pushing growth further down and exacerbating unemployment. Ultimately, the challenge for India is to transform a trade shock into a catalyst for domestic reform and resilience. The global ripple effects of the 50% tariff on India extend far beyond the bilateral relationship between Washington and New Delhi. At one level, this episode is a direct escalation of the trade wars that have become a defining feature of international politics over the past decade. Trump administration has consistently used tariffs as a blunt instrument to extract concessions from allies and rivals alike, whether against China, the European Union, or now India. In doing so, the United States is signaling that no country, regardless of its strategic importance, is exempt from economic pressure if it chooses a path contrary to American interests. This raises profound questions for the future of global alliances, particularly as countries weigh the costs of aligning too closely with Washington's demands. For India, the tariff shock is a reminder of the limits of relying on a single major partner for trade. While the United States remains a critical destination for Indian exports, the episode may accelerate New Delhi's push to diversify markets and strengthen ties with regions like the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. By spreading risk across multiple trade relationships, India could reduce its vulnerability to unilateral actions by any single power. At the same time, this diversification is not easy, as it requires building new logistical networks, negotiating trade agreements, and ensuring that Indian goods meet diverse regulatory standards across different markets. Nonetheless, the long-term strategic effect of these tariffs could be to nudge India toward a more multipolar trade strategy. The ripple effects are also being felt in the broader geopolitical arena. Countries that maintain energy or defense ties with Russia are closely watching the consequences of Washington's action against India. If the tariffs succeed in forcing New Delhi to scale back its Russian purchases, other nations may anticipate similar pressure and adjust their strategies accordingly. Conversely, if India withstands the blow while maintaining economic growth, it may embolden others to resist American demands, further eroding the effectiveness of tariffs as a geopolitical tool. This uncertainty feeds into the larger trend of fragmentation in global trade governance, where the rules-based system under the World Trade Organization appears increasingly sidelined by unilateral measures and bilateral disputes. For businesses and investors, the unpredictability of tariff wars adds another layer of risk to global supply chains. Companies dependent on stable trade flows between India and the United States will need to rethink sourcing strategies, potentially shifting production to countries not caught in tariff crossfire. This kind of disruption mirrors what occurred during the US-China trade war, when firms relocated parts of their operations to Vietnam, Mexico, and other markets. Such shifts may bring short-term instability, but could reshape global manufacturing hubs in the years to come. Ultimately, the global impact of this dispute is not just economic, but psychological. It signals to the world that even long-standing partners can quickly become adversaries in an era of rising nationalism and protectionism. Alliances are no longer guarantees of economic stability. Rather, they are subject to the shifting calculations of political leaders. In that sense, the 50% tariff on India is more than a trade measure. It is a reflection of a world where economic tools are wielded as instruments of power, and where nations must increasingly prepare to stand on their own in a volatile and uncertain global order.